So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a little review of how we simplify rational expressions, how we add, subtract, multiply, and divide rational expressions. So we're going to be working on the page that says 8485 graded worksheet. And what we're going to do is there are 20 problems on this page, and I'm going to do 10 of them with you. And as you're watching, as we're going to do them together. So I'm going to need you to probably split your screen or have do something so that you can watch me as I do them and also work them with me as we go. So we're going to start with number 2. And we remember that we simplify rational expressions by factoring. So the first thing we want to do is we want to factor the numerator. We're going to take out 7. When I take out a 7, I get 7 times a minus 1. And then we're going to factor the denominator. And what I see in the denominator is the difference of two perfect squares. So once I have factored my denominator, then I can look to see what the restrictions on the variable is. So remember, the restrictions on the variable are what makes the denominator 0, because we don't want to divide by 0. So in this case, I see an a plus 1. So that means that a cannot be negative 1. And I see an a minus 1. So that means a cannot be 1. And then I'm going to simplify my fraction by reducing a minus 1 over a minus 1. And because remember, anything divided by itself is 1. So I end up with 7 over a plus 1. Okay, so that's how we simplify expressions. So let's go down to number 4. We're going to do number 4 together now. And I am going to factor. Notice there's nothing to factor in the denominator, but in my numerator, I can take out a 2r. 2r is my greatest common factor. So when I take out a 2r, I'm left with 4t minus 1 over 2rt squared. So now I'm going to look at my denominator, and I see that r cannot be 0, and t can also not be 0. And then I see that also, what can I simplify? I see a 2 over 2, and I see an r over r. So what I'm left with is 4t minus 1 over t squared. Okay, we're going to go to number 5 now. Number 5 has, I see, in the numerator, difference of two perfect squares. So I'm going to factor k squared minus 9, k plus 3 times k minus 3, all over 3 minus k. And so I see in the numerator, so let's talk about the restrictions. So the restriction on the variable here would be that k, well, let's see, what's going to make the denominator 0? What 3 minus what would give me 0? So I see that k cannot be 3. And then I also notice I have in the numerator, I have a k minus 3. In the denominator, I have a 3 minus k. So we remember that the way that we can fix that so that we can reduce is factor out a negative from the numerator. And instead of a k minus 3, it's going to become a negative k plus 3, so that I have 3 minus k in my numerator and 3 minus k in my denominator, so that I can simplify. So I'm left with negative and then k minus 3, all in parentheses. If I want to distribute, I can do that, but it's absolutely not necessary. Okay, so now we're going to go down to number 9. And I see a lot of factoring here. I need to multiply these fractions together, and I'm going to simplify before I multiply. So, and in order to simplify, we need to factor. So I've got p squared plus p minus 2. So that's going to be p plus 2 times p minus 1. And in the denominator, I have, I need factors of 2 that add up to negative 3. So that would definitely be p minus 2 times p minus 1. And then I'm going to go to the next fraction, and I see more trinomials to factor. Remember, we get good at factoring when we simplify these expressions. P minus 2 times p plus 1, does that work? Let's see. Yep. Outer, inner, that works. And then I've got p squared plus 5p plus 6, which is p plus let's see, 3 and 2 add up to 5, don't they? And 3 times 2 gives me 6. So now that I've factored everything, I'm going to look to see what my restrictions on my variable are. So I see that p cannot be, let's see, lots of things, 2, 1, -3, or -2. Any of those would make the denominator 0. Notice how I'm stating the restrictions on the variable before I simplify my fraction. We had to talk about that in class, how we want to make sure we look at the original problem to state the restrictions before we simplify. So let's see, I have p minus 1 over p minus 1. I can reduce that. I have p minus 2 over p minus 2. I can reduce that too. And p plus 2 over p plus 2, I'm reducing that as well. So all I have left is p plus 1 over p plus 3. Excellent. Okay, now let's work on number 10. All right, so I notice in number 10, I don't have anything to factor because there is only one term in each part of your fraction. So I'm going to go ahead and state my restriction. The only thing I see in the denominator is an x, so I'm going to say x cannot be equal to 0. And then I'm going to see if I can, let's see if we can simplify. I see 14 over 14. I'm going to cross that out. And I also see -16 over 8, which is going to reduce to -2 over 1. And so let's see, I'm going to multiply across now. Oh, I also see, notice I see an x over an x. I'm going to cross that out too. So it looks like all I have left in my denominator is 1. So I'm just going to multiply across. So -2 times, let's see, x squared and y squared times y would be y to the third. So that one wasn't too bad. We didn't have any factoring to do there. Okie dokie. Now we're ready to go to number 11. Hope everyone's following along. And notice number 11 is says it's we're dividing. So we remember that when we divide, we multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to do two things at one time. I'm going to factor my numerator here, factor out of 4. My greatest common factor is 4. And I'm going to, in the denominator, I'm going to factor out of 3. And then I'm going to change the division sign to a multiplication sign. And I'm going to flip the other fraction. So instead of 2n minus 4 being in the numerator, now it's going to be in the denominator. And I'm going to go ahead and factor out of 2 all at the same time. I think we can handle that. And in the numerator now we have 6n plus 18. So I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor, which is a 6. 6 times n plus 3. And then I'm going to look to see what I can simplify. Notice I have an n minus 2 over n minus 2. I have an n plus 3 over n plus 3. And I also have, so let's see, in the numerator I have 24. The denominator I have 3 times 2, which is 6. And 24 over 6 would be 4. So that works out nicely. Okay, so now we're ready to move on. We've done 1, 2, 3. We've done 6 of them together already. So let's go back and make sure we all have them done. If not, you're going to have to go back and finish them on your own because that's part of your lesson. So now we're going to go down to number 14. Now we're going to do a little bit of adding and subtracting. So let's see. We're going to start with 14. And I'm going to start by remembering that I have to get a common denominator. So I noticed that I have two denominators, x plus 2 and x plus 3, that don't have any factors in common. So when the two denominators don't have any factors in common, we just multiply the two together, and that's our least common denominator. So our least common denominator is x plus 2 times x plus 3. So we're going to change our numerators to make our fractions equivalent. So our old denominator was x plus 2, and my new denominator is x plus 2 times x plus 3. So I need to multiply this numerator times x plus 3. So instead of 2 times x plus 3, I'm just going to go ahead and write it as 2x plus 6. And the same thing with the next fraction. The old denominator is x plus 3. Now the new denominator has an extra x plus 2 there. So I'm going to multiply that 3 by x plus 2. And that's going to give me 3x plus 6. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to 3x plus 6. Now, once I get a common denominator, I'm going to add all my numerators together. 2x plus 3x is 5x, and 6 plus 6 is 12, all over the common denominator. That's supposed to be a 2 there. And the last thing I want to do is I want to factor my numerator to see if I can simplify. And I see that I cannot factor 5x plus 12, so I'm finished. All right, so we're going to head on down to number 16. And sometimes it helps us to get a common denominator when we factor our denominators. So once I factor this denominator, I see that there is a factor in common. It's in x minus 5. So our least common denominator is going to be x minus 5 times x plus 4. Remember, the factor they have in common only once, and then times all the other stuff that they don't have in common. So now I'm ready to change my numerators. The first numerator is not going to change, and that is because the denominator didn't change. And then now the second fraction, the denominator did change. We have an x plus 4 there that wasn't there before. So I'm going to multiply this 2 by x plus 4. 2 times x plus 4 is 2x plus 8. And now I have my common denominator, so I'm ready to add my numerators. So I'm going to say 3x plus 2x is 5x, and negative 4 plus 8 is 4, all over my common denominator. And then the last thing I want to do is look to see if I can factor in order to simplify, but I cannot factor 5x plus 4. So I'm done. Okay, we've only got a couple more. Hang in there with me. Let's go to number 18. Okay, so number 18, oh Lord, we have 3 fractions that we need to subtract or add. So I need a common denominator. There's a little x missing there. That's supposed to be an x. So let's see, what is the common denominator between 3x, 2x, and 18x squared? So let's start with the number first, 3, 2, and 18. I think the smallest number that all these will go into would be 18. And then between x, and x squared, I believe it's going to be x squared, always the larger exponent. So 18x squared is my common denominator. So I'm going to add all these together all at the same time. So let's fix our numerators. So let's see, 3x goes into 18x squared. How did it change? I had to multiply it by 6x, didn't I? So I have to multiply my numerator by 6x. 6x times 2x plus 1 is 12x squared plus 6x. And then let's go to the next fraction. It was a 2x and now it's an 18x squared. So I had to multiply that 2x by 9x. So I'm going to multiply 9x times x minus 5. So that's 9x squared minus 45x. And then lastly, the last fraction is not going to change because the denominator didn't change. So now I'm ready to add everything up. So we have to be careful with this subtracting here because I'm subtracting more than one term. So when I'm combining my like terms, I have to distribute my minus sign there. So I have 12x squared minus 9x squared, which is 3x squared. I have 6x, that's minus negative 45. So that's 6x plus 45x, and then plus another x from that third fraction. So 6 plus 45 is 51, and 51 plus 1 is 52x. And then lastly, I have a plus 4, all over 18x squared. So I don't think I'm going to try and factor that trinomial, only because even if I did, I don't think there would be anything to simplify. So I'm going to go ahead and stop. And then lastly, we're going to come to a complex fraction. So remember, we simplify, I'm just reminding you that we simplify complex fractions by multiplying everything within the fraction, the numerator and the denominator, by the least common denominator. So I'm going to multiply everything by b. So a over b, remember a over b times b is just a. And then 2 times b, is 2b. Now let's go to the denominator. We're going to distribute our b here. 1 times b is b, minus a over b times b would be a. And we're going to look to see if we can factor, which I do not believe we can. So we're going to go ahead and stop. Okay, so that is a quick review of all the stuff we've done so far in Chapter 8. So you're going to finish the other ones as your lesson 2 for the week. So good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.